Hey everybody, Gromos here with some more simulator battle gameplay from the events mode. This time the event is the Siege of Malta. Now this video is going to be a bit shorter. I got two short fights I want to show you, one in the Hurricane and one in the Mk.II Series 7. Normally I would have probably waited to get another fight or two to include in the video from another event. However, a new patch was just released, which among other things introduced some changes which may have an impact on gameplay, like changes to damage models and weapon damage and turret tracking speeds. Now I have not tested them a lot yet and I can't say much about the changes yet, but the thing is, as I have mentioned in the past, I do not like mixing footage from different versions of the game, and I won't do it if I can avoid it, so that you don't see things that work in one part of the video but not in the other. Anyway, this is why I will make a short video now, and next one will be entirely from the new patch. Now, about the event. This Siege of Malta event portrays a later stage of the battle, and the British have Mk.V and Mk.V Spitfires, Mk.I and Mk.II Hurricanes, and the Mk.VI Bowfighter in their lineup. On the other side we have for the Germans the Bf-109 F124, the Ju-87R2, the Heinkel 111, and for the Italians you can choose between the G50, Mc-200, Mc-202 and SM-79. I have flown the Mc-II Series 7 and the Hurricane Mk.II in this video. Now, both are interesting planes. The Mc-II I have not flown in a very long time, so let's talk real quick about it. It used to have some problems with the flight model, but that was fixed a while back and now the plane flies really nice, I would say. I enjoy flying it. As usual for older designs, the Mc-II is a light plane and turns well, but is not very fast. And it has a very weak armament, one of the weakest in the game. It's slower than the opposing fighters in this event, however it can beat any of them in a straight up turn fight. Now the Spitfire is of course a good turner as well, and the early Mk.I and Mk.IIs would have an even lower wing loading than the Mc.II, but the newer Mk.Vs in this event are of course heavier than the Mc.II, but with its large wing area, the Spitfire Mk.V still has almost the same wing loading than the lighter Mc.II. So initially the turn rate will be somewhat even. However, one thing about the Spitfire is that while it can turn tighter than almost anything else in its weight class, doing so will cost a lot more energy because of its weight and the large wings. So if a Spitfire Mk.V is going for a straight up turn contest with the 200 instead of using its speed to gain an advantage, the Spit will more often than not find itself at a disadvantage, because it is losing energy at a much faster rate than the much lighter Mc.II in a continuous turn fight. The same is of course true for the Hurricanes, which also have a pretty low wing loading thanks to the large and thick wings, but are even heavier than a Spitfire. So that is something to keep in mind when flying or fighting against planes like the Spitfire Mk.V or the Hurricane Mk.II, which is the plane that I flew in this event on the side of the British. For the Hurricane Mk.II it is even more true than for the Spit or the lighter Mk.I Hurricanes. So when you fly the Hurricane, even if you have the ability to turn very tight and you can turn into most opponents, you want to be more careful than in lighter turn fighters when to take full advantage of its turn rate, because if you overdo it, you will end up low on energy very fast, and especially a plane like a Bf-109 for example, which is good at energy retention, can take advantage of this easily. Now that is of course true for most planes and other turn fighters as well. However, most planes in the same weight class than a Mk.II Hurricane will be newer designs that are faster but don't turn as well to begin with, and most of the planes that do turn as well as a Hurricane Mk.II are lighter than the Hawker fighter. That is why it is in my opinion easier to run your own plane out of energy by accident in a Hurricane Mk.II than in many other fighters with good turn rate. On the plus side, the Mk.II is of course decently armed for a low tier plane with 12 guns, and with its heavier weight is actually not bad in a dive or a zoom climb. Well then, let's take a look at a fight in the Hawker Hurricane first. As I have said, it is a pretty short one, but I think it's a decent example for my thought process when flying the plane. In this match I initially flew to the west after starting from the airfield, planning to follow the western coast of the island while climbing and eventually swing around to the north and maybe surprise an opponent that is flying in a western direction from behind. And a little sooner than I had expected, I do spot the plane moving that direction, and I swing around to get behind it. Now I came around a little earlier than I was planning to at the beginning, so there is a chance that I get surprised myself by another plane flying that way further back, but so far I can see only one on a somewhat lower altitude, and I decide to go for it. As I get closer, it turns out the plane I am chasing is a G-50 carrying bombs and most likely going for some ground targets near the harbor city. The pilot has not spotted my approach, but I did not trim my nose down as much as I should have done at this speed, so my aim is a little bit bouncy. Still, I get some good hits in, and the G-50 stalls as it takes evasive action and is trailing smoke. Now, I use the speed I built up in the shallow dive towards the target to get some altitude back. I assume that there may be other planes nearby, and they might have seen the tracers from the attack. It seems the G-50 did recover from the spin in time, and I eventually lose sight of it. But there's no time to worry about him, because a 109F is coming in from my 12 o'clock position and passing me at high speed. I roll inverted and go in a split S to come around after the 109, and the 109 is going up in a loop and ends up on higher altitude than me. Now I could turn tighter than I do here and pull up sharply to get the pipper on the 109 and try to climb into fire range, but the chances of actually getting a proper shot this way would be poor, and it would waste all of my speed, something the 109 could easily exploit. So instead I just match the 109's turn on lower altitude and in a lag pursuit, meaning my nose is not pointing at the target but behind it, and I don't try to get the nose up at the target either. I either keep it level or slightly down when I want to get some speed back. This way I can stay with the Bf-109 and prevent him from going on the offensive without wasting too much speed myself by trying to turn too tight. The 109 is coming down again, and again it would be possible to get the pipper right in front of it and fire a snapshot while passing, but then I would pass the 109 and it would be behind me again. I would have to turn around while the 109 could come around in a loop. I instead try to fly in such a way that I can slot in behind him when he climbs down. And this way I manage to end up behind him the next time he is coming down from higher altitude, and this time I am in a position to start attacking. I am a little far away for the 30 cal machine guns, but there are a lot of them, and I can get some pressure on the 109. So he has to take evasive action instead of just using his speed to get away, and I do manage to get some good hits on the 109 and he starts trailing smoke. But at this time I take a hit myself. There's a second 109 joining the fight, and I have to take evasive action and let my target go. I can only hope that he is damaged enough to be out of the fight, and since I saw smoke coming from his engine, I at this point actually assume he is. I try to get a shot at the 109 as it passes, but I don't get quite enough lead, and the 109, which is faster, pulls away and up and is soon at higher altitude than me. As he's coming around again, I match his turn on my altitude. I don't try to get my nose up to climb towards him. And again, as he comes back around, I could get a head-on snapshot on him, but that would cost me some speed, and I would have to turn around level to get back on the 109, while he could most likely do a more energy-efficient loop or yo-yo turn, so I try to match his flight path in such a way to fly in the same direction than he is when he comes down and slot in behind him. And it works. Sadly, the other 109 did not leave the fight as I had assumed at first, and took the opportunity to go on the offensive again, and I take hits. And as I see my left wing disappear in the distance, I realize that this is it for this little fight. Not the most successful one, but I still found it entertaining to fly and hopefully worth showing. Well, let's take a look at another short engagement, this time in the Mk.II. Now here I was just coming back from patrolling the southeast side of the island, when I noticed a plane approaching from behind and I came around to attack. The plane turned out to be a bowfighter, and since my plane is pretty poorly armed, that is not a target I want to engage right now if I can help it, as there are still enemy fighters up and I don't want to waste all my ammo on the bow before I know where they are. So I don't press the attack after my first pass and instead keep moving towards the airfield where I assume some enemy fighters are. I would have liked to let my engine cool down before I get there, but I spot two planes in front of me and it looks like they're coming my way, so no time to throttle back. Instead I want to increase my speed to have all the energy possible when I meet them. Though suddenly I hear another plane pass me and I can see a Hurricane behind me turning after me, so I have to react to him and I turn to my left to attack. I lose sight of him for a moment, but see him again when he passes me a second time and I go after him. I first press the nose down a bit with the rudder while turning to go into a low yo-yo turn and then follow it up with a high yo-yo turn. The Mk.II turns better than the Mk.II Hurricane and loses less energy in a fight like that, so I get the upper hand pretty fast, but when I come in behind the Hurricane I can see two other planes coming in from the front, a Beaufighter and a Spitfire, so I have to evade them. The Spitfire tries to turn right after me, so I have to evade him first, as the Beaufighter can't turn that well and the Hurricane is moving away. The Spit turns better than the Hurricane, about the same than the 200, but again, if he tries to match my turn too long, he will run low on speed and I will gain the upper hand. But he's not alone of course, and the Hurricane came back in and got a hit on me. However, after the Hurricane passes me, he presents a more tempting target than the Spitfire, so I reverse my direction and go after him instead. I hope I might be able to get the Hurricane out of the fight before the others manage to come around to attack. As the Hurricane levels out, I am coming closer fast. He has his flaps all the way out and I assume he wants to get me to overshoot, and I have to go up in a barrel roll to prevent that and get back into fire position. I come down on his tail again and attack for a second time. I get more hits, but the Mk.II00's two Breda machine guns are not exactly the strongest aircraft weapons and it takes a bit to get some results. However, after a few more bursts I eventually get a crit on the wing and then I start to break off, and not a moment too soon, as I can see tracers fly by from the Spitfire which is coming in from behind. I turn out of his line of fire and the Spit seems to try to pull up, but apparently does so too fast and stalls the plane, and at this altitude there's not enough space to recover. Now, I kept my engine at full throttle as I considered the enemy planes a bigger threat than an overheat and I wanted all the energy I could get, but now I would have to throttle back all the way to get the engine cooled off in time. I hoped the Beaufighter is not too close and I can do that, but no such luck. The Beaufighter is coming in for an attack and improves the ventilation of my already well ventilated cockpit. Now, at first I consider turning around, pass under the Beaufighter and get the engine to zero throttle as I pass under him to hopefully cool down before he comes around for an attack. But then I figure I just don't have the time to do that anymore and I would lose too much speed, and instead I deck the Beaufighter to do as much damage as I can before the engine goes out. And on my first pass the Beaufighter's gunner knocks out my engine anyway. So now I have to try to get something done before I get too slow to keep the nose pointed at the target. I try to go for the wings and especially the engine nacelles. It seems the Beaufighter has throttled down as well though, maybe to get me closer to the gunner. So I have to make a hop over him to avoid a collision. But it also means I could shoot him at very close range and eventually I get one of the engines and it bursts into flames. I try to get the other one as well, but by now I am too slow and I can't get the sights on him anymore. And with my engine now completely out, I eventually go in. Now as I look up I can see that the fire on the Beaufighter went out, but luckily he has taken enough damage from it and also goes down. Sadly, another Beaufighter, the last plane on the enemy team, manages to win the game though. Still, it was a nice little fight. I enjoy flying the Mk.II00 and I hope I get the chance to try it in the Battle of Britain event soon. Well, those were two small fights from the Malta event. Not the longest or most successful ones, but I had fun, and I also hope they, especially the one with the Hurricane, also act a little bit as an example that less advanced fighters have their own advantages over faster, more modern fighters and can get the upper hand on them. I mention this of course because of the ongoing discussion if a more historic matchmaking would work in simulator battles, and a concern is for many that planes like a LAX-3 would be matched against 109s. And I think the Hurricane is somewhat comparable with the early LAX-3 when it comes to performance. Now, some might say that a Hurricane would never manage to get in fire position behind a Bf-109F if the 109 is flown perfectly. And I agree, if the Bf-109F is flown perfectly, it would most likely be the case. But here's the thing, nobody flies perfect. Everybody makes mistakes, even the most experienced sim pilots. There are few pilots that manage to get through even one fight without making at least some minor mistakes. Sure, it is easy to take a look at the recording of the fight afterwards and point out all the things that could have been done better, all the decisions that in hindsight were not optimal, but getting everything right in the fight itself, or making all the right decisions when there are only split seconds to make them, that is something different entirely, and that, in my opinion, acts as a sort of balancer. That's why having better turn rate and maneuverability as an advantage in less advanced fighters can balance out power and speed advantages of more modern planes. The more powerful ones have the upper hand as long as not much mistakes are made, but they are usually less forgiving towards mistakes and things not going well. For example, a Hurricane with a 109 on its tail well within fire range can still use its better turn rate to move out of its line of fire. The other way around, it should be harder for the Hurricane to get on a 109F's tail in the first place, but once you are there, it is a lot harder for the 109 to get rid of the Hurricane soon enough. Sure, the 109 is faster, but once close enough, the attacker has quite some time to fire until the distance grows too fast. Just a few additional thoughts on the whole does realistic battle ratings work thing. Well, and this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.